In fact, the acceptance and acquiescence to control has been perpetuated and enhanced, compounded and solidified, to the extent that if individuals found themselves in the embodiments of the early humans and were rather entrapped by these initial agreements of control, it's very conceivable then that they might remain as humans for lifetimes. The effects of what we decide must always be experienced, and in accordance with the particulars of the ideas. One lifetime or movie can very much run into another, as the groundwork from one, the agreements and decisions forged there, will be most aligned with the experiences possible on the very same planet. A series of rather dull, repetitive earthly sequels can be the result. For if an individual agrees and decides on all the particulars of a controlled planet, the experience will be that of a controlled situation, and as the foundational causal body agreements are retained, then returning into another physical embodiment will have the individual very much in another lifetime as the recipient of a controlled world. Very likely then that returning to Earth will be the case, and as the agreements, attachments compound, it would make it increasingly unlikely that the individual could find themselves on another planet. The real you, the real self that decides and nudges the personal self along, will endeavour to afford the personal self as much experience and as varied as possible, and so it follows as to why individuals would have lifetimes and embodiments all over the universe. But it's possible that individuals can become ensnared in certain self-considerations and agreements, and limit themselves accordingly. Perhaps limit themselves to a certain species. From the beginning of the human race, the reptilians did indeed lay the foundation for control, and glean agreement for it, but in the earlier stages of human history, it's more likely individuals would have their more varied body form lifetimes, that they would find themselves in all the various alien civilizations at a time before their consciousness became too compounded with human plight-controlled agreements. Perhaps the individuals who are more likely to be able to continually have varied lifetimes all over the creational universes are those that did not get snared to one particular planet. The shackles of earthly tapline agreements in place, but loose enough to give the individuals more scope and leeway. Perhaps the real selves of these individuals ensured the personal self dipped in and out of planets such as Earth, and not linger long, lest they get trapped and have to endure lifetimes limited to this reptilian-controlled planet. This would be according to the real self that oversees the personal creation its awareness is in, and for whatever reason it must have decided to not allow itself to be so earthly limited. The individual having an earthly incarnation may well find themselves having a focus or curious personal intent that would be at odds with the majority of humans. This would be something encouraged by the real self, if it was to ensure its personal self was not to be mired on earth. I can imagine perhaps an individual in the Middle Ages of human history, perhaps, having strange notions and considerations of worlds beyond the earth, to the bemusement of his fellows, and this focus, if strong enough, may grant him the consequence of finding himself amidst an alien race in the lifetime that follows. Some individuals, or their real selves, I should say, may decide to subject the personal self and restrict it to the earth, for whatever reasons the real selves may have. Perhaps they feel that it's more likely that an earthly, limited experience, and continuous at that, would more likely have the personal self wake up and seek to extricate itself from a very boring and repetitive cycle of lifetimes. For after a while everything must seem so very samey. If you've had millions of lifetimes on the same planet, although consciously unaware of this fact may be, the sense of having done it all before will very much stem from the causal memory vehicle of the self. Or other real selves may consider that it's more likely that as varied a series of lifetimes as possible will have the desired effect, that of the personal self wanting to see and be more than just occupying areas in creation. Either way, the objective is, the real intent is for the personal self to recognize the real universes and its real self, using the creational simulator and the experiences there as comparisons, things for the personal self to relate to. This would very much explain how individuals who have spent many lifetimes as various alien species would have far looser shackles of agreement taplines. They still would have them, as every individual in creation has a constructed consciousness that is the taplining anchor that holds them in the simulator. But if individuals do not linger too long in one particular place or species, then the taplines of that particular civilization do not cement and become ingrained. They dip in and out of species and take on temporary taplines, but not compounded to the extent that they become mired and locked into a species or planet and must endure thousands of lifetimes there consequently. Such individuals may not have such extreme levels of control agreements making up their created consciousness, and so we can expect that as such individuals pop into an earthly existence, they are more likely to exhibit traits you wouldn't associate with the average human. To suppress a species, you must limit that species, reduce them to the extent that they consider themselves in such a way as to be practically incapable of anything other than toil the slave master's fields. Anything is possible in creation, as it is a reflective bubble for what we decide. And if an individual has spent many a lifetime as a human, that individual's sense of the possible will be very limited, if not non-existent. Such an individual will have been indoctrinated into a consideration of being nothing but a slave, and will have agreed to the utilizing of only the very limited parts of itself, the emotions and mind predominantly. The consideration of being able to do and be anything will be very much suppressed, and the experience will follow such a consideration. For individuals bouncing about the cosmos from species to species, they will have a greater degree and sense of the possibility of oneself. They would have had lifetimes as telepathic species, as an example, or those able to manipulate matter with the mind, such as the Syrians. Consequently, when they enter a human embodiment, they will take on the limitations of a more limited vehicle, in the sense of its cognitive mind ability. But the sense of possibility will be retained in the causal memory body, and we would expect a far more freer expression of being with such individuals. These would be the individuals referred to as the star seeds, basically human embodied now, but the type of individuals that have had the far more varied array of alien lifetimes, and far more freer in their consideration of self, as it pertains to their capability and sense of what is possible. As such, it's little wonder that such individuals, although not alien now, and not having perhaps the skills and mental abilities of their former species, will still display psychic traits, matter manipulating abilities, telepathy, and a greater ability to heal, etc. Anybody can choose and decide what they want in creation, and there's no reason a human embodied individual can't exhibit the same skills as a Syrian. But for the individuals who have spent too many lifetimes as a human and become mired in the limiting agreements and suppression of what is possible, is less likely then that they will be able to develop such abilities, even if they wanted to, as the underlying subconscious agreements to limitations of self and expression will sabotage such endeavours, or at least limit them far more than the individual who hasn't the same subconscious limitations programmed in and compounded and forming the foundation of their controlled and restricted consciousness.